Okay, it's story time. This year we have these waxes, these new kick waxes from Star in the Beta Race series that there is a real story behind. First, I want you to appreciate the label. It's got a rendition of our Caldwell Sport logo on it, and that indicates that it was a collaboration between us and Star. David Moseli, the chemist, has worked really hard with us to produce these waxes. They look really cool. The labels are paper on top of regular old tins. This isn't that uncommon in small series waxes because you have to order thousands and thousands of tins to get a painted tin. When you look, some of the Vauti, the new pure waxes are the same. It's a paper label on top of tin. Pretty standard. A lot of companies do it that way with smaller series. I don't think we're ever going to get into the thousands on these. So, the story behind these are based on mix waxes that I have been working on and making for a lot of years. I have made a lot of mix waxes. Mix waxes are just when you take ingredients from, well, not even just ingredients, other waxes. Waxes from brands that are out there, and you put them together in a pot, you melt them, and you make your own wax. Although you're not actually making it, you're mixing it. It's cooking. You're just cooking. It's just a little pot of wax that you put together and cook, and every self-respecting waxer has tried this at one point or another. For me, I started back in the early 2000s with a long series of what I'd heard about cowboy waxes, or blello, as Ruff Patterson used to say. Basically just blue-yellow mixes. This was like a staple. A lot of people mixed a soft wax and a hard wax, and I think this is one of the very early tins. I can't read the label. It's really dirty. I used to be able to read them, but I did a whole series of different ratios of some different waxes and found some interesting stuff. I tried putting fluoro powder into them and found a concentration that I thought worked pretty well. And over time, we started using these in some races, like one U.S. National Championship in McCall, Idaho. There was a JO's in Fairbanks when we raced on it with New England, and this is a long time ago. I couldn't possibly reconstruct the years that this happened, but it really started to take off in around 2005, 2006, when we started adding some clister to the mixes, and we made a bunch of different versions of this. There was a couple years there where Nick Brown, who's the waxer for the Craftsberry Green team, was working with me, and he got into the party as well. So a lot of what I learned in the early days was with a lot of help from Nick Brown. Here's one of Nick's tins. It's a M3SO M3MOS2F. So it's a molybdenum additive in the wax. There's a funny story on this one because at the time we were mixing the wax on a little pot over a camp stove with open flame, and the moly powder is incredibly fine, and Nick gets out the spoon, he puts the moly in, and the powder in the air ignited, and he had this huge explosion. Maybe it blew up out of the tin, I don't know, something crazy happened, but he eventually got some wax out of it. And it was good once in a while. Too much molybdenum, man, it makes wax feel muddy, not very good. Nick had a sense of humor too. He's got a label on here. It says Rolly Bits with much humidifiers, which was a definite. That was just a reference to the really funny translations on all the tins, especially from Finland. For years, if you ever need a little chuckle, go grab a tin of Finnish wax and read the translation on the back. It's pretty good. Anyway, Nick's a big part of this story for sure. Over years, we kept trying mixes, and in 2007 and 2008, Amy got a job out at the Callahan Valley coaching, and I moved out there, and Eric Nilsson came from Sweden to be her assistant coach. Eric, big, tall Swedish kid. I guess he's not a kid anymore. He might have a kid now. Crazy. Time passes. Anyway, we did a lot of mixing together, and Eric came up with this ZE mix. That's for Zach Eric. And started making labels, and we tested a bunch of these. He took them around with Amy's athletes, and we're putting them on. So SYG50, I'm pretty sure that might be a star yellow green 50-50 mix. Looks like it got used, maybe. I don't know. ZE Mix M339. Oh, I know what that is. M3 M3 is the original blue-yellow mix that I came up with that I really liked. And there are a lot of waxes in here based on that mix. 39 is clearly Guru 39 Clister. I mean, there's no way that could be anything else. So that has to be an M3 mix mixed with Guru 39. And if I recall, it was absolutely terrible. Just so slow. Most of this stuff was so bad. I think I had written down in a notebook something like 160, 170 different mixes I had tried. And in all that time, we had success racing on 6 of them, 6 mixes. It's not that easy to figure out a way to improve on what wax companies make, because the wax companies are actually pretty good at it. Anyway, lots of Eric Nilsson put into these waxes as well. One of those early mixes was this one. Here's a ZE Mix T250. That's a Terva mix. I know this. This one is something that I kind of heard about from Larry Porama. Larry was working with the U.S. team as we were doing testing on the build-up to the Olympics in 2010 at the Callahan Valley, and Larry went on to become the head waxer for Sweden for a number of years, including at those Olympics. He left the U.S. team and joined Sweden, and they had great success. But Larry mentioned a mix of Terva waxes, a Terva hard wax and Terva Clister that had been pretty good, and I tried it in some different proportions. And this was 50 usually means 50-50, right? So this would be a T250, 50-50 of, I guess, the hard wax and the Clister. I think that's what this was. Anyway, eventually this became T12, and then there were some other versions of it, like T12G became a cold version. We've used that a lot in racing. This, I think, was a replacement of one of the ingredients with a different brand. Didn't work out very well. You can't just replace one brand with another. This was one that actually stuck. So this was T12S. Here it is. That got rebranded as Cool Monkey. We had a Cold Monkey. That's T12G. And then we had T12S, Cool Monkey. Raced on this Craftsbury Marathon one year when I did the race with Gunner as a Coke Leaguer. I was the chaperone, and I could barely keep up with him on the uphills, but I had to push him on the flats. Lots and lots, even more modern mixes that just went nowhere. These ones, I'm sure I have them written down somewhere. Spent a lot of time taking the paint off the tins. Oh, that was Nick's idea. Way back when he pulled out this, yeah, like this one right here. He came in with a bottle that said aircraft remover. I'd never heard of it. And I'm like, Nick, what is aircraft remover? And he's like, it gets the airplanes off of the tins. It's paint remover. It bubbles up the paint. I guess, I don't know why it's called aircraft remover. Maybe you've heard of it. Funny, Nick. Anyway, these things were terrible. I remember testing them. I don't remember what I put into them, but they were awful. So slow. Most of these mixes are just slow. Clister mixes are tricky. When we're mixing Clister in, we're doing it in order to try to get better speed and more tack and security in the kick. But it's really easy to make the waxes slow with Clister intuitively, right? It's tricky to make it fast, and when you figure out how, it's really good. So these ones, these Star ones, the story here grew out of really pretty much this wax right here, which is this M26, this Beta M26, is what we built out of my M25 mix. M25 is exactly the same as a mix called M3R. And the M3 you might recognize, that's the original blue-yellow mix. And the R refers to the Clister that we put into it. And I had fluoro in that M3R as well. It was a fluoro, low melt point fluoro powder that we floated in there. And it's really hard to mix. You have to stir it into suspension while it cools, or else mix it in powder form while the wax is cool enough so the fluoro doesn't sink, because if it's melted, it'll sink right to the bottom of the tin. When wax companies put fluoro additive into wax, they use mixed chain fluoro, just like in fluorinated paraffins, and it goes into suspension. It's actually soluble in the wax, and so it mixes really easily. But pure fluoro, the perfluorinated powders and stuff, they don't mix well with paraffin or wax, and so getting them into suspension was hard. In the end, I ended up chasing the fluoro out, and this became M25. M25 is the percent of the of the clister in the mix. There's a little code, you can figure that out. So this was our original M3, 25% clister. The M3R version is one of the 6 waxes that we've used a ton in competition. And I guess the biggest story was back in Val de Fiemme World Championships in 2013. And that was Sophie Caldwell's first World Championships. She was a year out of Dartmouth or something, racing for SMS T2. And she had the best U.S. finish in the sprint, the classic sprint in Val de Fiemme. The day before the race, the girls, and there was a good sprint team. This is like Keegan and Ida and Sophie and I mean, it has to have been Sadie, I guess. They're all super good skiers. I don't remember exactly who had the starts, but I think it was probably those 4 for the classic sprint. They did a hot lap, sort of a time trial all together the day before, and we were out testing, and the waxing was pretty easy, but it was getting very warm, and there had been a bunch of new snow, and they right before the training opened up, there had been combined skiers out, and they went out and groomed freshly, tilled everything up, and the snow that had fallen fell really moist, and then it must have cooled down because all of a sudden the wax that was working had no kick at all. It just glazed instantly on the freshly groomed snow. And we had all the skis spread out, and we just had training wax. And I think everyone was just putting on Swix Red, like literally whichever one it is, V75 or V70, I can't remember, V60, I don't remember the numbers. It's just old school Swix Red is what people were kicking on, but I had a tin of M3R in my pocket, and I had this low pair of 902 skis that actually belonged to Amy. Chris Hall had given them to me at West Yellowstone several years before, and it has just been a great pair of skis, low, easy kicking 902 Fishers, and I had them there to work with Soph. And I put on one layer of the M3R, and Sophie tested it, and she was like, it's good. Usually that's how Sophie was. Oh, yeah, it's good. I can race on that. She can race on anything. And so they went out. Sophie skied up the first hill in the pack, and as they were coming back down, she just glided away from everyone. The skis were super fast. I was like, whoa, well, that worked out. Too bad tomorrow won't be like today. And she was like, yeah, that was fun. It was so awesome working with Sophie. Anyway, tomorrow was like today. The next day, the conditions were just the same, and I tried the same wax, and it felt really good. It worked 2 hours before the start. Same skis, same wax. I might as well have just not even re-waxed them, although we had to, of course, do the glide. But the skis felt fantastic, and I told the other guys on the service team, and what was going on, and I was nervous because they were chasing all this different stuff and much higher skis, and I had Eric Flora jump on the skis. I said, Eric, am I doing this wrong? Just try these skis. And he skied around the little test corral, and he came back and he's like, oh yeah, those feel good. So I was like, great, awesome. And I put the tin on the bench, and I was like, you guys try this if you want. I'm gonna go with it for Sophie. And I'm pretty sure they didn't, but I think it was because they were all chasing higher camber skis and needed more volume in the wax job. So I don't know that they tested it. Anyway, Sophie used the wax, and it was really good, like really good. And she got 22nd, 21st, something in the low 20s, best U.S. finish, and that was pretty good for a really young skier. Anyway, that's M3R that then became M25. Well, 4 or 5 years ago, I looked back over all my notes, and I realized that in the whole time I'd been testing kick waxes, there were only like 6 different ingredients that ever contributed to a good solution, to like good wax. And I was like, that's kind of odd. These must just be really good for mixing. So rather than try to continue to add tons of different ingredients, I decided to just start trying to play with proportions and mixing these waxes in different ways. And I pretty quickly came up with, here, the M25, and then 2 versions for colder. There's an M20 and an M15. And those waxes, Sophie had skied on the M25, and that was cool. The first time I tried these 2, the cold ones, was, let's see, what was it? It was NCAA Championships at Traps. That's just a few years ago, I guess, that I was doing that. When was MCA's at Traps? My brain's failing. In the morning, it was quite cold, older snow, And this M15 felt really good. I gave a tin to Brayton, and he tried it with the Dartmouth skiers, and Catherine Ogden won NCAAs on this race.
Oh yeah, that's it! Come on, Catherine!
And later in the day, a couple teams raced on M20 for the guys' race. And yeah, later on in a Super Tour sprint at Craftsbury, Ida Sargent, a year after she retired from World Cup racing, raced and won on M20 up at Craftsbury against a Super Tour field. That was fun. So these things have been race proven, and yeah, for a little while I was mixing them up, and I made some labels with Sophie and Ida and Catherine's signatures on them, just to recognize that they had had success on the wax. They all gave me permission, and I put the signatures on. But the funny thing was, Catherine was still in college, and Brayton said, hey, you can't use Catherine's signature on there. And I said, oh, but the wax is just named KO. No one knows what KO means. Well, of course, everyone knows what KO means, but the NCAA doesn't. So I had Brayton sign his name, and his middle initial is K, and so he's BKO. And I was like, I'll just sign your name, and I'll use that instead. So the signature on the KO is actually Brayton Osgood. Eventually, I replaced it because Catherine became a professional. But more recently than that, we started trying to replicate these waxes. Now, these things each have 6 different ingredients from 4 different companies. Totally impractical to actually produce them. It takes a lot of time. You got to control the temperature really closely. You got to measure the ingredients really, really carefully. I've got this huge spreadsheet that gives me the recipe for the amount of tins I want with enough overage to allow to pour, and it's just a time-consuming thing, and it takes up a huge amount of space, and makes a colossal mess, and no one loves it when I'm doing it. So I really wanted to find a way to manufacture these things in a wax, have a wax company make them for me, but these were all blends of different waxes. So I started, because I have a really good relationship with Davida from Star, I started working with his waxes to try to make them, and I made these blends, these Star blends, that were trying to get the performance of these waxes out of Star materials, but it didn't really work very well. At the same time, I was trying different additives, and I got into trying lots of different things. These are all versions of M. Okay, so this is a M20, but these are M25, M25 AC 0.5, MD 1.5. That's clearly something pretty black in there. That one's black too. Oh, that's a T1.0, M25 T1.0, and M25 AC1. They didn't do much. Kept trying. M20 MD3. So the numbers are obviously like the quantity, maybe it's grams per tin, I think. It's all written down somewhere. None of those did very much. At any rate, eventually Davida and I got together, and I sent him all my notes, like all the notes, the whole history of trying things that had led to these 3 waxes that were really good. And I also sent him all the ingredient waxes, and we spent a bunch of time on a FaceTime call, kind of, getting little wax strings. You've seen that, right? Where you get a little bit of get a little wax in your hands, and you make the strings, and it does different things depending on how tacky the wax is. And he knows how to interpret this. He's like, oh yeah, okay, I can make that. I have no idea how. There's a ton of ingredients in these things, but we were freezing the wax too, seeing how much the temperature changed, or how much the hardness changed in temperature. One of the reasons I think the clister mixes are interesting is because the clisters, if you choose the right ones, are very thermally reactive, so they're really a multi-grade element. As it gets colder, the clister stiffens up, and the wax changes a lot through changing temperatures. So when you get the balance right, you have a wax that kind of moves with the conditions. It's pretty cool if you can get it fast enough, and that's what I managed to do with these. At any rate, Davida made a bunch of mixes for me, and what we did is we divided the kick wax mix and the clister mix into two different components, and he made me the different kick mixes based on my recipe and the clister blend based on my recipes, and I started mixing them in percentages, and I tried a variety of different percentages, and I found in fact that I wanted just a little more clister in than my original mixes, and that was interesting. I didn't anticipate that. We also started trying different additives on top of it, so like there's the M25, and then this is M25C. I think this is using the same ceramic that he puts in his glide waxes. We had talked about that. It's just kind of interesting to see what that would do. What else have we got? We have, oh, here we go. This is interesting. Okay, so this is M25-26. So this is the M25 mix with a 26 percentage. 25 mix, 26 percentage with ceramic, and 25 mixed 26 percentage with G. Must be, I think it's a graphite that he's previously used in kick waxes. So yeah, we're trying all sorts of different additives and different percentages. In the end, sort of by the end of last year, we had settled on these mixes. And what we found was that they don't feel identical to the M series that we've been working with and racing on for the past several years, but they behave very comparably. So, you know, I spent a bunch of days skiing here and in Craftsbury with say the M20 on one and the Star M21 on the other, and it was kind of back and forth. Like they didn't behave exactly the same, but they were both really good, and they behaved very comparably. And then we'd go up the step, and yeah, they worked as we expected. So yeah, I became quite satisfied. They're still really prototype. Like there wasn't a lot of racing last year, and we just dialed in the percentages toward the end of the year. So I haven't even tried any of the final production. I got Davida to put a little dye in there, so they're colored. Most of the original ones weren't colored at all, or they were just the really original ones were like the mix of everything. They just looked like mud, kind of. Because I didn't put any dye in. It was just the combination of all the dyes from the waxes that went in there. So these actually look a little nicer. And I'm really excited because it's finally, I don't need to make a mess of the shop. There's some testing to do. This is why they're in the beta program from Star. This is stuff that we know we're going to race on, but we're still testing. And so there's no saying that we won't revise this formula in the future or keep chasing it. It's a really, really fun process to work with kick wax. These waxes are really good when the snow is transformed and old, or even just worked a lot. It doesn't need to have been through a full freeze thaw cycle, but the edges need to be knocked off the sharp points of the crystals. They need to be, the snow needs to be acting a little bit old. Man-made snow, they're great. Snow that's been groomed 2 to 3 times, usually already very tolerant of these waxes. The trick is that when they start to pick up ice, it happens slowly. It's like boiling a frog. It'll just sit there. That's the legend, right? The urban myth that if you put a frog in water and turn on the heat, it'll just sit there and slowly boil until it's cooked, because it just doesn't feel it getting hot. It's got to be a lie. Maybe I think it just can't get out because the pot sides are too high. I'll have to ask a frog. But that's how these work. You feel like you have perfect skis, and in fresh snow, you go skiing, and after a couple K, you realize you're missing some kicks, and they don't feel as good as you thought they did, and then you're really struggling to climb some hills, and you're not gliding all that fast, and you look at the bottom, and there's just super fine ice really integrated into the wax. It's not clumped on, but it's just, the wax is crystals are freezing into the wax, and it's really insidious, and it takes a long time to cork out and heat out. So yeah, I'm not over-promising on these waxes because you can get into trouble if you try to push them into really fresh snow that's prone to picking up ice. You don't want to do that. But I'm excited because in the past several years with these waxes, we've ended up racing on these far more often than not, and there is nothing out there that I've found that comes close to these. There's lots of new waxes coming that are targeting older snow, but these have been really competitive, and I'm very excited to get these new Star versions on the snow because last year's testing was encouraging. Okay, that was a really, really long-winded explanation of some of the background and history of what went into these waxes. We don't have an exclusive on them, but I think we're the only one that's got them because we're the only one that knows about them. Davida can make them for anybody. He's passed them to some national teams, I guess. They're not a catalog item. He's just making them for me. But the nice thing about kick waxes is if we run out, he can make more and ship them over pretty easily. There's no liquids, so it's not a hazardous freight or anything. So yeah, I'm excited. I hope these go as well as I hope they go. I think they'll go pretty well.